Yo, what's going on guys? Arekkz here. Welcome back to another video for Monster Hunter Rise. And in this one, I want to round up some more information that did the rounds this week. If you guys caught my video on Tuesday, you'll know that I had the exclusive opportunity to speak to Ichinose-san and Tsujimoto-san and ask a lot of questions about Monster Hunter Rise. If you haven't seen that, I will link it down below. I got to ask some kind of really specific questions, things that I know you guys and myself definitely really wanted to know. So if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend you checking it out. However, alongside that, there were also some media outlets, both in Japan and in the West, that got to ask some questions as well. And while some of the things they asked were sort of pretty standard, there were a few things they managed to touch on that I didn't get to ask. So for those of you guys that missed the additional information, I thought I'd round that up today. There was also Famitsu that dropped yesterday, and I worked with a translator to go through that. That issue doesn't really have too much in truth. There is one thing I do want to kind of touch on, but outside of that, there wasn't really too much in this week's article. There will be another one next week, so hopefully that will shed some more light. So as and when it does drop, I will be sure to let you guys know. But for the time being, let's talk about this stuff. So, point number one, this came in combination both from the Famitsu article and also from some of the Japanese media outlets, and it just touched on the fact that Monster Hunter Rise has been in development for 4 years, so it was actually in development alongside Monster Hunter World and Iceborne, which obviously, you know, we know this anyway because there are multiple Monster Hunter teams, so it is hardly surprising that they are developed in parallel. But it's also worth mentioning because some people have made the comparison between the Wirebug and the Clutch Claw, but given that they were being developed side by side, it's actually interesting to hear that the Wirebug was not, in fact, inspired by the Clutch Claw. Also, relating to the Wirebug, it is worth noting that it was mentioned in one of the interviews that there will be no Wirebug-specific armor skills. So while in something like Generations Ultimate, you could get some skills that allowed you to, you know, regen your Hunter art slightly quicker and things like that. When it comes to the Wirebug, that is going to be a fixed mechanic, so there won't be any kind of armor skills where you can speed up cooldowns and things like that, because I guess, you know, given that it's integral to the way you use and play your weapons, they want to be able to balance it accordingly. So armor skills will of course relate to your weapons, your playstyle, all that stuff, but Wirebugs will be separate. Now, on top of that, there was one interesting thing that came from the recent Famitsu article. Again, this largely speaking just speaks about things that we knew already. It was basically just like a big recap article. However, one of the interesting things worth mentioning is that whenever they talk about the story and they talk about this sort of rampage that happened 50 years ago, the reference they often make is to do with, in Japanese folklore, this thing called the Parade of 100 Demons. Only in Monster Hunter, it's called the Parade of 100 Dragons. And it's an interesting play on words, but obviously this, as a concept, has been seen and done in many different games before. But it's quite interesting because, of course, the notion of the Parade of 100 Demons in Japanese folklore basically tells the tale where one night all the demons will come out and parade the streets. This will be the yokai, the oni, the ghosts, and the tsukumogami, and they would basically parade through the streets, and of course the only way that humans would be protected is if they had certain scrolls. Now that in itself is, you know, a story for another time, and if you want to look more into it, then do go and Google the Parade of 100 Demons. But when they reference it in the kind of vein of Monster Hunter, and of course they've referenced this sort of event that happens, you know, 50 years ago, this rampage, maybe they're going to sort of do a parallel where you've got like loads of different monsters to fight. That could be really cool. Honestly, that much is just speculation at this point, but it is interesting how they're sort of making that parallel, and again, that is quite a common sort of folklore story beat that is often used or referenced in many sort of Japanese themed games. So, you know, not exactly surprising, but maybe it kind of paints a potential picture for what the rampage could be. Anyway, outside of that, moving on to the next point, they mentioned that the Hunter voices, I kind of touched on this before, but the Hunter voices are optional and of course can be tweaked. You can tone down the frequency, so if you've seen them performing some of the attacks, they basically have voice lines.
Take this! It's over! After it! Got it! I'll show no mercy!
Honestly, I think this is quite cool. I think it kind of adds more personality to it. But if there are some people that kind of think it gets a little bit annoying, you can tone it down, turn it off completely. And you can also have English, Japanese, or Monster Hunter voices for your characters. Also, on the topic of voices, my little sort of segue here, they did confirm there is no voice chat support. Now, I know some people might be a little bit disappointed with this, but it's Nintendo Switch, I kind of expected that. And given that a lot of the time you might be playing it portably or on the go, then yeah, there's no native voice chat support, unfortunately. After that, as mentioned before, this is kind of just a quick recap point, but I did mention in my initial interview, the one that I did with Socks, that the game will of course be getting post-launch support in the form of event quests and stuff, and in my more recent interview, I managed to confirm that event quests will be available offline. However, relating to that, people did then ask whether there would be plans for G rank. You know, obviously the typical structure, again, for those of you guys that are new, Monster Hunter will always come out as a high rank version, so you have low and high rank quests, and then typically there is a second release, which of course adds G rank. Now, they did say, of course, right now there are no plans for G rank because they are still finishing the game, But that is also how it always goes. You know, they're still in development, they're still working on this, and they're still thinking about post-launch support, so it is far too early right now to even be entertaining the fact of G-Rank. That being said, it is a format we are very familiar with, a format we do very frequently see, so I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest if following launch they do then start work on the next expansion, because, I mean, it's probably going to be a few years before we see anything on the next generation system, so hopefully it'll be like our, you know, Rise launches, a full year of Event Quest support, maybe there'll be Rise G-Rank expansion, and we then have that for another couple of years. But anyway, that to one side, no confirmation right now, but anything is possible. They also went to talk a little bit more about the Amiibo. Of course, the Monster Hunter Rise Amiibo we know already will unlock layered armor. We don't know what that layered armor looks like right now. We have, of course, seen the silhouettes, but outside of that, we do not know anything more. But they did also say that if you use non-Monster Hunter Amiibo, you can use them for basically like a daily lottery, which will just give you items. I'd imagine basic items like potions, rations, that kind of thing. But either way, your Amiibo will be useful. Quite whether it's going to be every Amiibo or just some of them, kind of hope it's every single one, because I've got a lot of Amiibo, that's a lot of items, but anyway, that to one side. They also touched on difficulty scaling and said that that will be returning based on the number of hunters in your quest. They also said that all cutscenes will be skippable, so obviously if you're playing online and you just want to get into the action, then of course that reduces your friction. They confirmed there will be no new weapons this time around, but of course you do have all 14 weapons, and they all have new actions with the Wirebug, so while they're not new, they will of course have new behavior, so there is still going to be new stuff to learn, and of course that means new weapon tutorials which you can expect on the channel at launch. Following on from there, they also said there is no Prowler mode, so obviously that was introduced in Generations. A very cool system, but unfortunately not something that we'd make a return. Hardly surprising, it was obviously one of those things that was kind of unique to Generations, so I didn't expect to see it return, especially with all the new additions like Wirebugs and Palamutes. But either way, no, you will not be able to play as a Prowler. They also hinted at potential changes to the mounting system. The main reason for this is, of course, they said that they will be speaking about mounting a little bit later, and obviously if it's a system we've become familiar with over the past few years and they don't want to talk about it just yet, probably implies there are some changes to it. Quite what they'll be, who knows? I think the main thing worth noting is that, of course, now that we can just swing into the sky at basically any point, they're probably going to have to make some adaptations, because otherwise we can just mount spam the hell out of anything. Finally, the very last point actually pertains to controls for bowguns, ranged weapons. They actually mentioned for Nintendo Switch, there will be gyro options. Emphasis on options here, you will not be forced to use it, but I know this is something that is actually quite exciting for a lot of people. Some people, you know, if you've played something like Splatoon, you'll probably be familiar with the kind of different aiming permutations. You can just aim with the analog sticks as you would in a normal shooter, but you can also aim with the gyro functions of either the Pro Controller or the Nintendo Switch itself. So if you want to be able to have a motion control element to bowgun aiming, then that's going to be an option. Again, if you don't like it, you can use your regular controls, but that is something else. Anyway, for the time being, that is pretty much it. That's a rundown on the other stuff you might have missed if the only thing you've seen so far is my interview. So now you're completely up to date. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and of course keep it locked for plenty more Rise coverage. Thanks very much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed that video. Don't forget, if you haven't already done so, you can join the Arekkz Gaming Discord. We've got an awesome community over there with so many different channels for you to chat loads of different topics and different games. I'm in there, the team's in there if you guys want to chat with us, find people to play with. It's just in general a great place to be. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to turn on those notifications so you don't miss any of our future uploads.